Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to our EUKI Academy web seminar tackling transport poverty. Thank you for everybody for joining. And while we still have some participants entering the call, I will already say some introductory words before we dive into the topic. Please keep your microphones muted throughout the event. Feel free to keep your camera on. We are recording the web seminar today to later provide it on our website. And if you have any questions or comments throughout the event, please write them in the chat and we will collect your questions for the Q&A session at the end. You will also have the opportunity to ask your questions directly to the speakers after the panel session as well. Great. So I'm Julia von Fiebern, EUKI Academy Coordinator, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this important discussion today. EUKI, the European Climate Initiative, is a funding instrument of the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, Climate Action, Nature, Conservation and Nuclear Safety to strengthen cooperation in the EU and in the further development and in the implementation of its climate policy. And the EUKI Academy offers different formats in the areas of networking, the development also of technical and methodological competencies, and in the enhancement also of technical knowledge of climate protection actors. And we regularly organize web seminars such as this one. So we hope to see you in future events as well. And now to our topic of today. While energy poverty is increasingly acknowledged and tackled, transport poverty continues to receive little attention in conversations about sustainable mobility. Now, the upcoming introduction of ETS2 casts a spotlight on the impact of transport accessibility. And as the shift to low-emission transport system accelerates, it's essential, of course, to make sure that vulnerable groups are not left behind, especially in rural or low-income regions with limited infrastructure. And today, our speakers will share their insights and expertise, helping us to understand how the current definitions by the EU can be applied and which approaches work in practice. So before introducing today's speakers, let me introduce to you our moderator for today, Dr. Johanna Cludius. She's a senior researcher in climate and energy at the EUKI Institute in Berlin. And she was a lead author of the EU-wide study on transport poverty, analyzing indicators and mitigation strategies for DG Ample, where she also worked with Thais Gonçalves, who is also joining us as a speaker today. Dr. Johanna Cludius is currently working on the scientific side of the technical support instrument for the social climate plans, modeling the impacts of ETS2, and identifying vulnerable households for both energy and mobility poverty. And her background is in research on the social impacts of energy and climate policy prior to her postdoctoral position at the Swiss Competence Center for Research in Energy, Society and Transition in Winterthur. So Johanna, we are very glad to have you on board and I hand over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Julia. Thanks a lot for having me. It's a real pleasure to be the moderator of a seminar on this very important topic, and also with four really great speakers that I will introduce to you in a minute. And firstly, quickly on what you can expect for today. We'll start with the speaker introductions, then we have two short statements on transport poverty from two of our speakers. Next, we will move on to a panel discussion with all of our four speakers, and then the final segment of today's seminar is a Q&A where all of you will be able to ask your questions or where we will ask the questions that we've previously collected in the chat. But let me start with introducing our four speakers. One of our speakers is Thais Gonçalves. She joined the European Commission in 2021 and serves as a policy coordinator for the Social Climate Fund, where she works on implementing tangible measures to address social aspects of climate policy and in relation to the Social Climate Fund, of course, specifically related to the ETS2. And in her previous role at DG Employment, she coordinated the study that Julia already talked about on transport poverty, which was the first ever EU-wide analysis of this important issue. Next, we have Pedro Jomem de Gouveia, who is the cluster lead for safety and security governance and integration at the Polis network since 2019, where he works on technologies and policies for local transport. He also coordinates the Polis working groups for safety and security, focused on making city streets safe and transport systems secure, and the working group for governance and integration, supporting local and regional authorities in advancing sustainable urban mobility. Next, we have Marko Velsek, who is the deputy head of the Zagreb City Office for Municipal Self-Government, Transport, Civil Protection and Safety. And he will bring in his experience from this perspective, and he will present on the important steps that Zagreb has taken towards making transport sustainable and more accessible, for example, by making public transport free for youth and the elderly, and by integrating gender perspectives into mobility planning. And last but not least, we have Katyusha Schafts, who is a senior expert at Focus Association for Sustainable Development, based in Slovenia since 2016. And she's also part of the EUKI project, Transforming Transport, Climate Action Meets Social Equity, which is focused on reducing transport poverty in Czechia and Slovenia. She is an expert on research and advocacy related to transport poverty in Slovenia, focusing on identifying vulnerable groups and designing inclusive mobility solutions. So thank you very much to our four speakers for being here. I think it's really great, sort of the breadth of perspectives that we're covering and the experience that's in the room. And I would say we'll jump right in with our first introductory statement by Pedro. Pedro, the floor is yours.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure, and above all, it's an honor to be among such the distinguished speakers. In my country, where I come from, in Portugal, we have Fado nights where different singers align, and we usually start with the poorest. That's me. So if you don't like what I say, don't worry. It can only get better. So Polis is the leading network of European cities and regions advancing transport innovation, and we focus specifically on innovative policies and tools and measures and strategies that can make urban, suburban, and rural mobility more sustainable, safe, and equitable. So dealing with transport poverty is a core problem for our members, and it's a core priority for our activities. Now, to understand and see and look at transport poverty, we don't look at it from a research perspective. We look at it more looking for ways to deal and target and find, let's say, a strategic approach and effective measures to best tackle with the resources we have the reality on the ground. But it's obviously always very important to understand it and frame the challenge. So, to put it perhaps simplistically, the way we see it is, well, for over a century, we've had two realities, two trends going on. On the one hand, urban expansion, and with it, roads into suburban and suburban, ever widening suburban areas, and at the same time, a preference for the use, in terms of transport policies, a preference for the use of individual vehicles. Of course, these two things, if you have people living further away and moving more and more, using vehicles with internal combustion engines, obviously, you have massive consumption of fossil fuels and massive emissions of CO2. At the same time, with the industrialization of the agricultural sector, and for other trends also that foster the rural exodus, we also see that there has been a contraction of public services and private services away from rural areas. So the lower densities of rural areas were not that low in the past. The simple thing is that, we have less people, an aging population, but also a lower provision of services. So these two things combined lead to people who live in lower density areas, so rural, peri-urban, and suburban areas, having to move a lot in a system based on motorized traffic in the use of individual vehicles. And so there's high consumption of fossil fuels and emission of CO2. So the transport poverty problem has been along for quite some time, also in research. I mean, there's a fantastic research done over the past 2 decades. So why is it suddenly a policy priority? Well, because the EU is preparing to implement the emissions trading system 2, which will apply to road transport. What it does is it will impose a limit on CO2 emissions, and it will inevitably raise the price of fossil fuels. That's the whole point of the system. So it is careful. So the last time this was tried in 2018 in France, well, it triggered the Gilets jaunes movement. It was the last drop, a fat drop, let's say, in the cup. But so it is natural that we are concerned because we do need to implement an emissions trading system. We do need to raise fossil fuel prices. At the same time, we must survive as a society and as a political system. And so we must be very careful as we look at the real dimension of the challenge. The first time we started hearing this discussion in the Brussels bubble, it reminded me a bit of Queen Marie Antoinette, who allegedly said when she heard that the people were starving and didn't have food, she said, they don't have bread, we'll give them cakes. Well, it's not clear she did say this, but it went down in history as the failure of the governing elite to see and understand and deal effectively with the problem that the people was living. So we can't just look at transport poverty and the reduction of CO2 emissions and say, just give them electric vehicles. Because first of all, many people will never be able to use electric cars. And because we really need to see, we need to approach things differently. You can't solve forced car ownership by, giving electric cars. That's the whole point. So how can we deal effectively with this? So we believe that there are 3 things to consider. Well, first of all, when we look at transport poverty, basically, I'm simplifying again, because I know that there are some experts in the room. I'm not an expert. Where we see it, well, there's people residing in areas with low density and or having to do trips in off-peak times, so late shifts, very early shifts, and or have a disability and cannot overcome physical barriers in the public transport system. So it's not only people who live in a rural area. You can live in an urban center, but if you use a wheelchair, and you can have the subway station next door, but if you cannot use it, well, you're in transport poverty. So people who have one or more of these characteristics, they basically are pushed into making a bad choice because they have bad options. If you have a huge difference between options, you really don't have much of a choice. I mean, yeah, you can always walk 30 kilometers, but that's an option, theoretically. In practice, it's not. So these bad options put people in these conditions between 2 tough choices, 2 bad choices. One, either you spend too much money on a car, or you spend too much time in an underperforming public transport system. So this pushes people to, as I said, spend too much money on a car. Forced car ownership is a reality. You not only are obliged to own a car, but to make many kilometers in it every day. Or another option is they simply give up on trips. And one thing is giving up on going to the cinema. Still, it is against one of your constitutional rights to culture and leisure. But another thing is, giving up on health services, giving up on education, etc., on jobs, etc. A second point is that as we look to the problem to deal with it, we have to understand that energy poverty is different from transport poverty. They may have the similar roots, share some root causes, but the way to deal with it has to be radically different. Because to deal with energy poverty, so you basically insulate your home, you reduce energy consumption in your house, but that's your house. That's a static asset. It's not going to move. And what you do in that home will not influence the homes around it. Whereas transport is a dynamic system where many actors make up what is transport behavior. The behavior of some actors can change the behavior of other actors. So there's this dynamic element. Also, because in one home you have one household, but in terms of transport behavior, one household is made up of several individuals. Different age, gender, occupation. Some go to school, some go to their jobs, some go to a medical consultation. Different levels of autonomy. You've got elderly people who need some support. You need adults who can go alone to their jobs. You need kids to sometimes need support to get to their school. So there are different people with doing different types of trips for different purposes in different locations in different times. So there is a huge diversity. So you can't just say, oh, okay, I'm going to insulate the home and I'm going to provide this household with an electric vehicle. It doesn't solve the problem. At least for a large part of the household, starting with women. And finally, I think that we have to look at the problem, really in understand that, number one, it's a structural problem. It's been around for a long time. And obviously, the Social Climate Fund doesn't have enough money to solve everything. The point is, do we use the money available to, give an aspirin or to start proper therapy, to start really moving things in the right direction, away from an outdated, problematic mobility paradigm, and creating alternatives? The second question is, it's not a national problem, it's a regional problem. It's not about cross-country travel. It's about daily access to jobs and schools and health services. So local and regional action is decisive. That's where we have to create the solutions. Another point, like I mentioned before, is that this is about lack of choice. Forced car ownership is not freedom of movement, it's lack of choice. So we really have to support the emergence of a multimodal transport menu. People need options. So the more options they have, obviously, the more in this menu, the more versatile the transport menu will be, and the more easy it will be for them to find the best and most efficient solution for their transport needs. And finally, just an idea, which I find also very important, is that the problem is access, not mobility. It's not about facilitating or encouraging or supporting mobility. If a school that is in your neighborhood is moved to 100 kilometers away, if I move it 100 kilometers away, I will be increasing your mobility. Not necessarily good for you. So the point is we need to improve accessibility. And so helping people reach services, or, that's my final point, helping services reach the users. We usually think of health services as, going to the emergency, but actually the massive majority of health services is about people accessing, treatment for their chronic illnesses like diabetes, dialysis, physiotherapy, psychotherapy, lots of stuff, having regular medical appointments. So for example, in this domain, we can work with the health sector to find ways to have a huge chunk of these health services being brought to the users who are neighbors, rather than making each user reaching the hospital that is 50 kilometers away and then back home 3 times a week. So, the whole point, just to finish, Joanna, I think that the whole point about this being a structural factor is not to intimidate us to think, oh my God, it's a structural problem, then we can really do anything. No, structural problems are the ones that we can solve. And so, but of course, it requires discipline and sometimes thinking out of the box and sustained action, pushing in the same direction together. So I think that's the real challenge, first of all, that we face, is understanding this is a structural problem and committing to dealing with the structural factors behind it. That's it. Sorry for being too long.
All good, Pedro. You're right on time, and I think it's very impressive what you covered in the space of 10 minutes. I think you really went through lots and lots and lots of really important points that will serve us really well in the discussions that are still to come. Next, I would invite Thais to give her introductory statement and also invite her to maybe respond to Pedro's comments on the fact that transport poverty has only relatively recently become a policy priority at the EU level, and also talk a little bit about maybe how far the Commission has already come since it has become more of a priority.
I hope you can hear me now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Johanna. Thank you, Pedro, for making my life easier with this introduction. I will quickly share the screen, just because I have some images. You can let me know once you see it. I think you should see it now.
Yes.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I will start my presentation by providing a bit of conceptual framework, which I think many of you are already aware, but this is important to reply to the question that Johanna just made and the remark by Pedro that we've recently started working on this topic. I mean, compared to how it has been long discussed in academia, I think at the EU level and in the Commission, it is a relatively recent topic. But it is true that we've been working on it for quite some years now. And it started a bit with the project that we had with Johanna. So a lot of the presentation that you will see here today was actually done by her and her team in a project that we worked together in DG Employment, and that they did this study for us. So it started already quite some years, and it slowly provided the conceptual framework so that we arrived now at what we have in terms of policies at the EU to address transport poverty. With that being said, so first in the study that we did with EUKI, Johanna and her team, the first thing that we wanted to establish is that transport poverty is a multidimensional factor. So it's not only related to other topics, adjacent topics such as mobility justice or transport disadvantage, but it also is influenced by different dimensions, which can affect the degree by which different individuals experience transport poverty themselves. So, for instance, on one side, we have the social economic dimensions, such as income, gender, or age, and so on, while also the spatial dimensions that Pedro mentioned, be it rural, peri-urban, suburban, and the different levels of actions that can be taken also at urban, local, regional, or national level. They can highly influence how transport poverty is experienced by different individuals and different groups. With that in mind, we established the concept of transport poverty along three main dimensions, and one horizontal cross-cutting dimension, which is the one that you see below, inadequacy. So just to remind, in the EU, we sought to define transport poverty with what we call the 3 A's. First of all is the availability, which Pedro framed very, very well, which is whether the transport exists or not. So first of all, the transport option needs to be there. Then the second one, because just the existence of the transport, as was just mentioned, is not enough. It needs to allow you to reach essential destinations. So if the transport available takes you to where you need to satisfy your basic daily needs, and actually also to promote social inclusion. So the transport gives you access to employment opportunities, to education, to healthcare services. So it's really seeing transport as an enabler of social inclusion here with this accessibility dimension. And then third, and the one that we hear maybe the most policy-wise, and especially now linked with the emissions trading system, is the affordability dimension, which is the ability to cover the costs of transport, of course, always looked at in relation to income. With that in mind, so with the study that we carried out and with this conceptual framework that we arrived at, the first definition of transport poverty was included in an official piece of legislation, which was the Social Climate Fund regulation. And as you can see, the definition encompasses these 3 A's, maybe not in such a direct and straightforward way, but the idea is there. So first we have the affordability with the inability to meet the costs of transport, accessibility with the access to essential socioeconomic services and activities, and the availability because it's implied that the transport should be there first and foremost. Based on this definition, also in the context of the project we carried out, we also explored together with Johanna and the team what could be done to actually measure transport poverty at the EU. And at the time, we didn't have any robust or regularly collected data on transport poverty across the 27 member states. So this was really a challenge that we overcame. And I will just show one example of each of the dimensions of the indicators that we were able to arrive at with what was available at the time. So that gives us an idea on how we can assess transport poverty along its different dimensions, which is something that is really challenging. So first of all is a concept that Pedro mentioned now, which is what sometimes we call forced car ownership. So it's actually looking at people who are materially and socially deprived and that at the same time own a car. So this implies that the person owns a car despite being poor because they lack an alternative that is, for instance, public transport. So we looked at this indicator, and as you can see, we have above the EU average numbers for Greece, Cyprus, Spain, Portugal, Bulgaria, France, Romania, and Ireland. So there is a, let's say, not completely straightforward, but an indication of a southern concentration of this indicator, which is relatively high. So this is one indicator that we can use to assess the availability of transport. Then for accessibility, one indicator that we came up with, and I will come back to it later because there has been recent developments in this field, is the commuting time to work above 30 minutes. So how long people take and who takes more than 30 minutes to commute to work. And here we can see it also by degree of urbanization, because this is important to understand, as Pedro just mentioned, the sparsely populated areas. And we see that it's higher in rural areas in a few member states, such as Cyprus, Estonia, Luxembourg, Slovenia, and Slovakia. Then finally, on affordability, we looked at affordability of private transport, but we also looked at affordability of public transport, where respondents replied that they consider public transport tickets too expensive. And this here, it's an important dimension of how we look at transport poverty, which I think it needs to be highlighted. And we're seeing this quite a lot now as we start implementing the Social Climate Fund, which is also a subjective nature of perception of transport poverty. And I think this share of population for whom the ticket is too expensive indicator, it shows this quite well. Because my perception of having a public transport that is expensive can be very different than from another person. So for me, maybe where I have abundant public transport options, or I can walk to satisfy my daily needs, I might consider that the ticket is expensive. But maybe for someone whose only alternative would be to own a private car, that cost of opportunity would be lower. So here, and we see now with the Social Climate Fund implementation that there is a subjective nature and a perception nature dimension, let's put it away, to transport poverty that it's quite important and that needs to be considered. Then what we've been doing in terms of policy at the EU level, there has been quite some developments. First of all this conceptual framework that we built for the EU that didn't exist before, and now developing to the policy side. As I mentioned, we had the Social Climate Fund introduced in 2023, and there we included the first definition of transport poverty ever in a piece of EU legislation. And this was quite an important step, because the first step to address the issue is to define it and to measure it. So it was really important to have this definition enshrined in this regulation. And then we also have now the implementation of the Social Climate Fund, which is just starting. We have only 2 member states who officially submitted their social climate plans, but we hope that more member states will follow, where they can include specific measures and investments that address transport poverty in their national social climate plans. Then, and as I mentioned before, there has been some developments on how to measure transport poverty. Alessandro, who I understand is also here in this meeting at the Joint Research Center, and his team have been working really hard to develop and launch the first transport poverty hub in the EU, which is really an impressive platform where we can see in maps transport availability, so the existing networks, and accessibility, which is looking at the time and that takes to reach specific destinations, such as, for instance, primary schools. So I would encourage you to check, because it's from where we started in defining transport poverty 4 years ago to this hub. It is really an impressive work that the colleagues carried out. And then finally, now, very recently, in May 2025, the Commission adopted its first recommendation on transport poverty. So it really builds on the study, the hub, and everything that we've been doing from the background, let's put it this way, and put it on paper as recommendation to member states. So it provides the conceptual framework that I just presented to you, an annex with suggestions for indicators on how member states can monitor transport poverty, also a lot based on the examples that I showed you. And then it provides, and thinking of the Social Climate Fund and the social climate plans, ideas for measures and investments that member states can carry out. And here it's really important to underline some of them. First of all, incentivize and increase the use of affordable and accessible public transport, first and foremost. Then support the development of sustainable on-demand transport, shared and active mobility services. And we are seeing now with the Social Climate Fund, if I may, that on-demand services has been quite an important alternative for sparsely populated areas, where maybe a creation of a new transport line would not be as cost effective. And instead of maybe subsidizing individual private cars, electric cars, as Pedro just mentioned, the on-demand transport alternative appears as a very important one. Then another issue that we're quite seeing a lot now in the context of the Social Climate Fund is really looking at the specific target group, not only by identifying who are these people that need more support, that need the most the support to tackle transport poverty, but also understanding how we can incentivize or how we can promote alternatives of transports together with this group. And here we're talking about simple initiatives, for instance, when we develop an on-demand service, that it is accompanied by information campaigns to increase the uptake of this new service by that population group. So let's say if it's an on-demand service for hospitals, that maybe the elder population will learn how to use and how to call for this on-demand service, or if it's through a digital app that we provide alternatives so that it's more accessible to the whole population. So these are some things that we are seeing and that we would really like to encourage member states to explore in their social climate plans, and that it's provided in the transport poverty recommendation of May 2025. As of next steps, we will continue with member states on this basis to implement the Social Climate Fund. And not only, there are other EU instruments such as the Connecting Europe facility, which supports and the development of transport networks in the EU, and where we would like to see the concept of transport poverty strengthened and these principles enshrined. And with that, I'm too long and I'll stop here.
Thanks a lot, Thais, for this overview and also for bringing some slides. I think it was good to get some visuals, especially on the concept. So next we will move to the panel with our 4 speakers. We've heard now from 2 speakers on their take on the issue, and then especially on the EU or the Commission perspective on the issue and what's been going on at the Commission. And that's why I would like to start off the panel asking Marco, who represents a very local view on the topic. And Pedro said that we need solutions for transport poverty on the ground, at the local, at the regional level. I mean, Zagreb is a city, I guess mostly densely populated, but maybe you're also responsible for some less populated areas. And we also heard that you've already implemented some solutions. So I would just be interested in hearing what you've been doing in Zagreb and how this relates to what we've been hearing before.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thank you for watching. Anyway, if you know, maybe you don't know, Zagreb is not a big city, but it's not also a small city. It's 170,000 inhabitants. We have an area of 640 square kilometers. So if you would calculate the average density of population, it's approximately 1,200 inhabitants per square kilometer. Zagreb is quite big in area terms because some of the areas are rather dense populated and some of the areas are rather scarce populated. So we have combination between parts of Zagreb that are more rural types and parts of Zagreb that are more like urban ones, So in the last 20 years, Zagreb has organized a commission for the people with disabilities. So it's a commission that acts like every year for the last 20 plus years and incorporates also the civil society services, NGOs, and also all the services from Zagreb and a national level, such as offices and ministries and representatives from different types of associations in order to provide or to find out what all the people with disabilities really need. What are the basic needs that we need to tackle with it and try to do as much as possible to reduce the exclusion of the people, in Zagreb, And I would say in the last couple of years, it's been quite busy, with all different stuff. And from my perspective, from my office, we mainly deal with mobility. So Zagreb has for the last 130 years a tram network. We got tram in the 19th century. So currently we are still, I could say, stagnating with the development of tram network. But what is the point that 160 kilometers of tram network is available currently in Zagreb? 1,500 kilometers of bus lines are available in Zagreb. So when you count all the bus stops and tram stops, it's a number of 1,000, almost 2,000 stops in Zagreb. So what we found out that is quite challenging for us, that many bus and tram stops aren't accessible for the people with disabilities. Also for the elderly people, with people that move slowly, that have problems with big steps and everything. So we are currently mapping all these problems alongside the city to isolate the ones that are really problematic and try to find a way to tackle with this problem, like moving out the barriers, widening some stops, making new pedestrian crossings, just to take away the mobility problem or accessibility problem to certain stops. Why did I mention the public transportation in Zagreb? In the last 1 year, last year in June, we completely set it free public transportation for the people over 65. So all the people in retirement basically have the free public transportation in Zagreb. As of April this year, all this public transportation is free for the people that are under the age of 18. So if we would count on the people under the age of 18 and above the age of 65, we are talking about 40% of the whole population of Zagreb. So currently, if you visit Zagreb, and I would invite all of you to visit, half an hour of using a public transportation is 80 cents. So it's quite cheap. And basically in a half an hour, you can reach maybe 10 kilometers of location to be with bus, tram or something. So you can say that you have a rather small amount of money needed for moving throughout the city if you are not in the category of under 18 or above 65. And also people that are like low income also have the possibility of getting like a free or reduced bus pass or tram pass. So these are really good stuff, because we found out that, inflation is everywhere in Europe. So reaching to the people to giving them this extra small incentive to use free bus public transportation is quite. I think it's a really nice thing. It's a good thing, What we also did, we are organizing together with the people with the Association of the Blind of Croatia, different workshops with different stakeholders inside the city of Zagreb. So we did a couple of workshops with the bus drivers from the public transportation company. So and tram drivers, so they could realize all the problems that the blind people are facing when waiting for a bus or tram. So we have installed some kind of speakers on trams. So when the tram approaches to the tram stops, it sounds, okay, we are approaching the tram stop like this. So the blind people could hear what tram is approaching or what direction the tram is going. So basic stuff, easy stuff that all the people are taking for granted is something that we want to find out what we need to do already, in order to provide extra availability and mobility for every people, or also for vulnerable groups. I could say also, yeah.
Thank you. I mean, it's already very impressive what you told us about what Zagreb is doing, and I think also this, well, your initiative to bring all the different stakeholders on board sounds great. The bus drivers and people that are blind, and them understanding each other through this type of work. I would like to move on to Katyusha. I mean, we heard that you're currently working on an EUKI project that looks at transport poverty in Czechia and Slovenia. And I would like to know if this project is more related to the measurement and identification, so maybe more related to these data and indicator questions, or more related to effective policies and measures, or maybe both. And then tell us a little bit about how that is going and how that's related to what we've heard before, what's ongoing at the EU level.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Katyusha Šauc. I'm coming from Focus. We have been working for over 10 years now on the issue of energy poverty, and we have just 2 years that we are also starting to work more and more on transport poverty. So we were involved in several research projects developing the issue in Slovenia, and we are also now currently working on the EUKI projects, which more focuses on how to empower municipalities. We are currently actually compiling a list of progressive mayors in Slovenia and Czechia, which are already doing something on transport poverty, and we will try to then compile what are the needs of those municipalities and try to then make a dialogue with the ministry on how the ministry can support these municipalities. We will also be looking at the sustainable urban mobility plans, and because this new generation of plans is now being developed, and we want to know how the municipalities in Slovenia actually address transport poverty in those plans. So this is a little bit about what's the EUKI project, but if I continue with how to measure transport poverty in Slovenia, the indicators that the Commission put forward were quite a good start. But as we know, transport poverty is really locally specific. So I guess each municipality, each country needs to build knowledge on what's happening within, what are the needs of people, what is the terrain. So it's a good starting point, but I think especially if we want to then identify what are these hidden transport poverty drivers. So when people actually don't perceive themselves as being transport poor, this is especially noticeable when elderly people are asked if they have problems with transport, but they can't even identify that this is something they're lacking because they simply don't visit friends, they don't make appointments at doctors, just those that are really necessary, but not maybe some other procedures that would help them, but they simply don't do them, such as like physical therapy and etc. Because they don't have a means of transport. But in terms of successful strategies in Slovenia at the moment, there are no systemic measures at the governmental level to tackle transport poverty. Only municipalities who actually realized there's a problem and started solving them each on their own. So when thinking about strategies, I would think that government needs to support municipalities who already are doing something, who developed a solution on the local level. For example, transport on demand for elderly people. In Slovenia, we have several implementations of this measure on municipal level, but some of them are outsourcing this to organizations that provide that. Some of them, they are solving it within themselves. And it's a really different. Now you have to think of a measure on how to support those, because mainly these services are based on volunteers, and actually municipalities don't need much to continue with the service, but they would need some sort of like a smaller financial contribution that they could offer to volunteers, like a free lunch or something like that, which would make their service better. They would have more volunteers for the services. But yeah, each country, each municipality has its own solution. So we have to think of the ways on how to support all of these implementations. And another thing is how to successfully address transport poverty is also looking at the vulnerable groups. Our experience with energy poverty is that the most vulnerable population is usually people who are really without agency, without means to find tools to solutions. So you have to be really proactive to come to them. For example, in energy poverty, we have energy coordinators who help these households apply for, do the paperwork. They guide them through the process of getting some subsidies. But in terms of transport poverty, we probably need to rely on organizations who are already dealing with those vulnerable populations. For example, in Slovenia, Roma population is the one who is really at a higher risk of transport poverty. And there are organizations who don't particularly deal with transport poverty, but they deal with the Roma people themselves. And for example, one organization tries, their goal is to have more kids finish high school from Roma population. And one of the key activities is driving them from their homes to schools. And yes, if there will be a nationwide initiative who would do that, it wouldn't be as successfully as those organizations who really know how to deal with vulnerable groups. They are embedded in the local environment. They know what works, what doesn't work. So this sort of support for these organizations who are already really successful is crucial.
Yeah. Thanks, Katyusha. Super insightful. I think maybe we'll stay with this question of where implementation works for a bit, and inviting everyone who would like to make a comment on this, and maybe also bringing in a little bit of a discussion that happened in the chat on just the breadth of the issue of transport poverty, right? Like you have this availability, accessibility, affordability, but there's so many political institutions or ideas or rules that need to be tackled. So in the chat, a lot was about spatial planning, for example. So it's not only about developing public transport, but maybe also about spatial planning. So yeah, I would invite you to comment on how policy on these issues should be coordinated between all the different actors that need to be involved, and also how implementation can work with these examples that Katyusha gave. Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself.
Can I just ask you a favor, Joanna, or the organizers? If you could, after the event, could you collect the comments in the chat box, copy paste it into an email, because some of them are really, really interesting. If you could share it with the participants, that'd be great.
And would anyone like to comment? Or for example, Marco in Zagreb, have you also, I mean, do you also go down this route that you implement ideas together with groups or stakeholders that are already active on the ground?
Why that is why I mentioned the 20-year collaboration, because a lot of ideas or like the incentives we get is basically from the associations of the blind people in wheelchair, with different kind of vulnerable groups, with also in cooperation with other city offices that or we also deal with problems with Romas. You know, we also have quite big problems with Romas in Zagreb. There were several areas where they used to live, and there was like it was really bad neighborhood, you know. So these were I could say houses, but they weren't houses, you know. So we did try to find a way of moving them to something more quality, more nicer, you know, with the utilities and everything, you know, just to provide people with basic stuff, basic needs, you know, so they can live, you know. But this collaboration, I would say, was with different association of the people with disabilities. It's quite good because we did last autumn some kind of workshop on ongoing, like on person, and we used our colleagues from the traffic department that mainly deal with approving projects on streets, sidewalks, building parking spaces, cycle paths, cycle lanes, houses, and everything. So the people that say, okay, if you would want to build a house or a street or something, you should build it like this. So we did some kind of workshop with them, with people with blind. They got like the blindfolds, they got the stick, the white cane, and they got an assignment to move throughout the city from location A to location B. And people would bump into different obstacles like scaffolding, signs, you know, all these obstacles that are in area, but most of the people don't realize that they are creating a problem for the people with blind. So we want to make them aware of the problems that some percentage of our population of Zagreb is dealing with, you know. So the next workshop we are trying to organize this autumn also is moving with wheelchair throughout sidewalks. You know, a lot of our sidewalks are rather narrow. They are quite steep, so it's quite difficult for them to cross the pedestrian crossing. We have, I could say, in thousands of speed bumps across the city. So a couple years ago, we were trying to make people that design the speed bumps aware, so that they are like completely in level with the curbs, you know. So there is no gap between the speed bump and the curb itself. So the people when moving with wheelchair wouldn't tackle over the gap between, you know. So we are doing new, I could say, generation of speed bumps that are completely connected to the sidewalks to the curbs in order to provide better accessibility to the sidewalks between different kind of streets, you know. What is also quite important is transparency, you know, to be able to communicate outside what we are doing, why we are doing it, you know. We also are combining different associations with different problems that are using the same infrastructure. For instance, people with blind people and bicycles, you know, the syndicate and everybody. So we are doing a new bike infrastructure in Zagreb that is divided by the curbs from the sidewalks and from the bike infrastructure. So why this is important for the people that are blind or like very they don't see quite well, or they are achromatic, or they cannot see certain colors. Now this curb creates a boundary for them, so they know that they are on sidewalk, and next to them is like a bike path or bike lane or bike something, you know. So this is quite important that we see, you know, every different group in Zagreb has the same rights, you know. So we were trying to way to level all the problems with every group that is available and create them equal opportunity for using the city. if you are in a wheelchair, it's quite difficult for you to go from your home to the theater and then return home. Why? Because at some point the tram stops riding overnight, so we are using buses during the night. So sometimes it is quite difficult for you in a wheelchair to enter the bus. So somebody that is walking from home and going to the theater or cinema or someplace, he cannot return home. So these are the small problems that really create liberty problems, the accessibility problems of the city, and they are quite small problems. So we do know the way to tackle with it to solve the problems, but there are no.
Yeah, passing to Pedro.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick on something that Katyusha mentioned. I think just to really underline it. I mean, it's and also that Marco mentioned in the solutions for Roma communities. I mean, it's a basic principle of community development that the best way to go is to mobilize endogenous resources, so the resources of the community. So independently of, of course, bringing new resources, but that should be done to enable the community to work by itself. So this mobilization of endogenous resources. And I think it's also a challenge, not only for the Social Climate Fund, but also for subsequent tools and it has been a staple of cohesion policy, that we support regions work for themselves. So of course, at the macro level, we have to be clear about the purpose. It's not, do what you want. There must be priorities in the way the funding is applied. But, at the local and regional level, we must acknowledge, first of all, acknowledge the complexity and the diversity of issues. I mean, and transport poverty is one of them. And empower local and regional actors to work, and understands that also goes with understanding the potential that local and regional governments have. And I think this is a very important point to make. I mean, not only in face of transport poverty and the Social Climate Fund, but also because we know that this is a bit where European funding instruments are moving towards, and so there's in competitiveness, industrial plan, etc. I mean, we are failing at the EU level. I think there's a failure to acknowledge the huge potential of action at the regional level. And another point connected to this, if I may, I don't want to, Joanna, may I just add a short comment?
A quick point, yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's that we all agree that, the silos and the this and the that, we have to overcome silos and blah, 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 blah. So the point is that, yes, on the one hand, we need to streamline things. So we can't think of housing and mobility and land use in separate things, and that's how we do it. So we have to, but to do this, it's not like we can, come up with a grand design that finally will do away with the silos. No, we focus the attention and we build teams to communicate and to focus on specific things. So we divide to conquer. And I think also that, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, there's the possibility of you can't bring users to the service while you bring service to the users. That's a case where transport and health service people can work together. I mean, it's also a point of understanding, for example, that there's a lot we can do with local authorities working with large employers to improve mobility solutions. I mean, for example, I remember a specific case, and then I'll shut up, where when I was working in Lisbon, we were working on to improve we started working with women in a large social housing neighborhood because they would come back from cleaning services, from cleaning offices and stuff like that at 1 a.m. And the only service available was the night service of the bus, and they were obviously scared of using it. because there had been some sexual harassment problems, and then they would have to walk home in the dark. So, well, it turns out that many of these women living in this neighborhood, they worked for the same companies. And it was possible to come up with alternative solutions for their transport. And even if they wouldn't work for the same company, you know, demand responsive transport would be an option. Or so we have to look for these opportunities. It's not just push a button that serves everybody. I agree, Katyusha, is, like you said, you know, there's a lot of work. And Marco pointed out that we need to bring teams together and come up with, yeah, but that's the way. And I think we should acknowledge and really try to do more of this.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Pedro. I think with Katyusha and maybe Tace, if she wants to come in again, we'll wrap up the panel and then move to the Q&A. And just for you to have in the back of your minds while making your comment, there have been quite a few comments in the chat around data availability, so that how adequate the indicators are that are there, especially hidden transport poverty. Are we able to measure it? Which other data do we need? Shouldn't we have a complete map, ideally maybe live map of the public transport system? Yeah, if you want to integrate this into your comment, very welcome to.
Yeah, no, I would just like to highlight also the fact that collaboration on local level is key. We found out that in smaller municipalities where these informal relations are and informal contacts are very live, a lot of issues can be solved. Also with collaborating with social services and community nurses, hospitals, etc. So it seems like in these smaller municipalities, sometimes the problem kind of resolves itself. And yeah, even though that these are oftentimes more in the rural areas, where you would expect that the issue of transport poverty would be worse. But if a municipality is very active, it can be resolved even easier than in the bigger cities where maybe community is not so tightly knit. Yeah, that would be for my part.
Yeah, can I? Anyway, you mentioned about live map of all the stops and everything. You know, we have interactive maps of every stop in Zagreb, so 2,000 stops. So we are currently mapping all these bus and tram stops for the accessibility, and like safety, because some of the bus stops or tram stops that doesn't have like a fence or something that is dividing from the cars. Some of the bus stops or tram stops are rather narrow. Some of the bus stops aren't equipped with tiles for blind people. Some of the bus stops doesn't have like a box in order to come from like rain or weather. So we are trying to map all the problems along the city and create some kind of action plan, you know, what to do first in this year, next year. So every year we install like 100 bus stops, you know, like equipping with all different stuff like garbage containers with signs, with digital signs and everything. So we are trying to speed up the quality of the current stops in Zagreb, you know. And we did try this pilot project. We installed, it's called ink displays. There are like interactive ones. So we installed them on some of the stops. So not only they are like showing the current the drive plan of the trams or buses, but also they provide information where the next bus is going to link you. You know, if you want to travel your journey from A to B, and also in some kind of weather danger, like strong winds, heavy rain, something, we provide also the information. Okay, stay away from the open fields because we are expecting high winds and everything. So these are the stuff we learned 2 years ago. We had like major thunderstorms in Zagreb in 2023. So in half of an hour, you know, we had whole city was completely covered with trees. Whole bunch, thousands of trees were like torn up. You know, it was like from Dorothy and Kansas. You know, moving all this whole bunch of stuff across the city. We are trying also to talk with people with disabilities, how to inform them of strong winds or high weather alert. What to do when we need to evacuate them from the buildings. It is quite simple, you know, to move a person from 5-story building. But if some person is in a wheelchair, or he cannot hear, or he cannot see, it creates a whole bunch of problems. We are integrated public fire brigade of Zagreb in order to how to tackle with evacuating people with disabilities from their homes. You know, people that are elderly, that don't have like kids or somebody that is looking after them. You know, so. It's also very sad because in quite recent years, after a while, you know, police like breaks into some apartment and finds people that died a couple of months ago because nobody called them or tried to figure out whether they're okay. So we have like special care for the people with disabilities, with vulnerable groups. So they also are part of this community. So incorporate all these different people into one single system is some kind of goal, you know.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is the moment where I invite you also to raise your hand. We've collected quite a few questions in the chat, so this is more Q&A. I mean, I think we've already answered some questions during the panel discussion already, but if you would like to ask your question in person, please raise your hand. And while we're waiting for volunteers to do so, I would like to look at a little bit more or at another aspect, like the funding aspect. We've heard about the social climate plans or the social climate fund that is making funding available, amongst others, to address transport poverty. But the question of, is this enough? What else do we need? What do we need at the EU level, at the national, at the regional or local level? What are your experiences in this area? I mean, Thais, I don't know, would you like to have a first go at this?
Yes, maybe I can. Just to say that this is one thing that when we go to the public debate, we really need to stress is that the Social Climate Fund is limited for a reason. It's because it was created to address the impacts of the new emissions trading system for buildings and here specifically road transport. So it's not that it's a fair transition kind of fund or a transport infrastructure fund. It has a very specific goal, which is, and it's something that Pedro mentioned at his presentation, that the ultimate goal of the Social Climate Fund is to avoid that the increase of prices by ETS2 is such that it makes people worse off. So it's really to prevent, let's say, a situation as it happened in France or something similar, where the impact of the high prices is such that that will make people worse off. So it has a specific goal and it has a specific objective. At the same time, there are plenty other EU funds that can be mobilized to invest in transport infrastructure. And this is something that with member states now in the context of the Social Climate Fund, we're really trying to highlight, and that we encourage that different funds are used to provide good alternatives. So we have the Connecting Europe facility, which is specifically for broad and big transport infrastructure, so building a new train line or building a new bus line as such. We also have the RRF, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which is now coming to an end, which had large sums in many member states mobilized for transport So one thing that we don't see a lot and that we would like to encourage more is to combine different funding opportunities. So maybe Connecting Europe facility provides the new train line, while the Social Climate Fund can provide the vouchers to access this new train line and information campaigns. And maybe local funds can be used to promote the accessibility of a specific train stop in a certain place for persons with disabilities. So this we don't see a lot in member states, this combination of funds, and it would be the ideal scenario because no fund is enough for the amount of the investments that we need to carry out. And I see Pedro has his hand risen, but just one small thing as I read the chat that maybe it's an unpopular remark I would make, is that what we see is that the needs for investments are quite significant, and that we see big areas and a number of people without access to transport, period. So for instance, a place where there is a bus that goes once a day. And this is really something starking where these people are highly dependent on cars. And then we have other issues which are largely being discussed here, which is accessibility by persons with disabilities, the adequacy and quality of transport. And I'm not saying that one is prior to the other, they should go hand in hand. But when we look at the limited amount of funds, it's also interesting to look how big the challenge is for certain areas in terms of non-existence of transport period, of public transport alternatives period, other than promoting accessibility maybe of already an existing service. And this balance, it's really hard to reach, but it's something that I see often is forgotten. And when I read the chat, I get this feeling a bit once again. Yeah.
Thanks, Thais. I think, Pedro, you put your hand down again.
Yeah, I mean, because Katyusha also has the right to speak, of course.
Yes.
I can wait.
Katyusha, please.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of funding, we also identified the existing climate fund, not the social climate fund, but the fund where the revenues from ETS1 are gathered as one of the options also to fund those measures. And another thing, the private funding. We think that in Slovenia, it's quite untapped potential, especially at the municipal level for organizing some sort of transport on demand where you can get people that live on the outskirts to the regional centers. So also the shops, shopping centers, and companies that are in the area should recognize themselves as that they are also are one of those who are maybe responsible to cover part of these expenses.
Pedro?
Yeah. I think this is a very, very important point that Katyusha made. Look, but if we're going to discuss funding in a broader context, I think first we need to make up our minds. I mean, because I think this is a basic, let's say, dilemma. Is transport poverty to be addressed and treated in terms of policy and funding as a marginal problem? Or, I mean, an inevitable result of any mobility system. And so, we just, deal with a few people who have that problem, give them aspirin so they won't complain much, and, they can carry on with their lives, better or worse, but, somehow. Or do we understand that transport poverty is a fundamental problem, a fundamental shortcoming of our current mobility system? And it's a problem that puts us at high risk. I argue for the latter. I think it is a fundamental problem, a fundamental shortcoming of our mobility system, and the high danger in which it places us is because it puts us in a very ungrateful, impossible dilemma. Meaning, if we do nothing about it, I mean, well, okay, so we don't raise the fossil fuel prices, we roll back ETS2, we don't raise the fossil fuel prices, just let people go on with their lives, well, we're going to be hit even harder by the climate crisis. And if we do something about it, we roll out the ETS2, but we do little to solve this problem, well, we're going to be hit by social disruption, like the Gilets jaunes movement in France. So, then, if you look at it and approach it and address it as a fundamental problem, well, then, if it's a marginal problem, well, it's going to get marginal solutions and marginal funding. ECF and a bit of here and a bit of that from local and regional authorities to match the bit of the Social Climate Fund. But if we look at it as a fundamental problem, then, well, yeah, then we have to, then the thing is we create a new way to approach mobility need or accessibility needs, and that will be able to not only capitalize on other investments that are already being made by local and regional authorities, but also will attract private investment because we're talking about making viable businesses solutions. That attracts private investment, and it also will be able to appeal to other users who are not poor because, hey, these are more efficient and economic solutions. So in lower density areas, suburban, peri-urban, rural areas, in lower densities, mass transit is not the solution, and it bleeds money. And it's, going around with an empty bus that goes once or twice a day is no solution for anybody. We need other solutions to work there in terms of shared mobility, like carpooling, car sharing, demand responsive transport, bike sharing, etc., etc., etc. These solutions are available already in dense urban areas because the business works there, because it's dense urban areas, there's high demand, well, you can make money because these are often private businesses working there. The challenge that we have, local and regional authorities, is to push, nudge, steer these companies, these businesses to also operate in lower densities. Well, where it's more difficult to make money and it's a higher business risk from there. But the point there is to make it viable, but you need public support for that. Public support, the same that is given, for example, for public transport to operate. We don't subsidize public transport companies because they don't know how to manage themselves. We subsidize them to compensate for the money that they lose operating in lower density areas. It's a compensation because they do a service. So public money to support those users and those services, well, it would go obviously into, for this to work, these businesses, they cannot only rely on transport poor users who cannot pay. They need a critical mass of users, and it's in the public interest. It's in the public interest to help them gain these critical mass of users, because then they can sustain themselves with a complement. We will be sustaining not the businesses, we will be sustaining the users who cannot afford the full cost of the businesses, just like we do with other solutions. So the point here also is that I understand the rules of the Social Climate Fund, and maybe this is not something to be done only or with the Social Climate Fund, but we have to understand that just focusing on the, being very strict about the beneficiaries and only funding things that will serve these beneficiaries and nothing else is very limitative in terms of, deploying and sustaining and helping these new solutions, again, who are in the public interest, thrive and serve larger amounts of people, and really getting those who can afford to help with their consumption, help those who cannot afford.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Pedro. I think it's very good to make this clear, this question about how high do we rate the problem and how much money do we assign to it depending on how high we rate it. Because we're nearing the end of our session, I would like to invite all of the speakers or some of the speakers to comment on next steps that are planned at their institution, or next steps that they think is crucial in tackling transport poverty, or next steps in their city, region, or country.
Yeah, first, anyway, we are currently planning to publish 6th edition of the strategy for people with disabilities. And also we currently published the Zagreb Social Plan. It's a plan for the 25-27 period, 3 years period. That's also concerned with low-income inhabitants. Some of the problems with moving around the city. Some of the problems we try to solve with free public transport for under 18 and above 65 inhabitants. So we are doing a whole bunch of action plans, strategies on a city level to find out what are the key elements we need to solve it in order to reach some kind of goal. We are also doing a bike cycle action plan of Zagreb, so it's currently waiting to be published in a couple of months. So it's also being commented and also engulfed in the Zagreb social plan and strategy in order to combine all these elements into one single one. So these are the soft projects because the goals are clearly visible and we know what to do, when to do, and how much money we're going to spend. So all the money is organized by the city itself. It would be also really nice if we would get national money or EU money, but it's currently only on a sole funding of the city itself. And I don't know, a good plan or a good strategy or a good idea what we need to do first, and then 6 months later, 1 year later, is the beginning of everything, And then and also to setting the quite easy goals, not goals we want to solve all the problems in 2 years. We want to do all the bus stops in Zagreb in 2 years to be accessible and everything. We cannot do this, but we can pinpoint the certain problems that are clear, that are objective, that are doable, and go for it and try to find it out. So yeah.
Thanks, Marco. Thais, Katyusha, I think we have time for a short last statement, if you would like to.
I mean, just in short, I do agree with the fact that we do need, first of all, a more comprehensive spatial planning and plan cities and dwellings in areas where actually you reduce the need for mobility, for transport, because you have everything in 15 minutes walking, and also yes, providing housing in regional centers, not because that is affordable, because in Slovenia we do see a trend of people leaving cities and choosing to live in the outskirts or in the rural areas because the housing in the cities is overpriced. So yeah, working on this systemic issue to actually reduce the demand for transportation.
Yeah. Thais, I would give you the floor for the last words if you'd like to.
Yes, I think I've covered institutionally what we'll be doing, implementing the social climate funds, and also now looking at the new EU budget to see how we can continue supporting and tackling transport poverty. And in terms of priority areas, as I said, I think, and now just said, look at transport poverty in a broad perspective, providing access to transport to those who don't have it yet, and improving the targeting of support measures to vulnerable groups. I think this is policy-wise what we'll be working towards.
Okay, great. I think we're right on time. I want to thank our excellent panel. I think it was super instructive, lots of food for thought. I also want to thank everyone who participated. The chat went wild and there was so much good stuff in there. I think, like Pedro said, it's really important that we save it. I would also ask you to fill in the evaluation survey that has been posted in the chat. It's very quick, so you only need 1 or 2 minutes. Yeah. Thank you, EUKI, for organizing, our speakers, speakers for sharing their thoughts and insights, and everyone for their active participation. Thanks a lot.